as weak as we art thou become like us. Thy pomp is brought down to Sheol, the noise of thy viols. The worm is spread under thee, the worms they cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, Hail ben Shekar, Lucifer, son of the morning, bright star, son of the dawn. How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nation.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing in the book of Isaiah. We are in chapter 14. And this is a very interesting passage. It's one of the first chapters in the Bible I tried to make a song out of in 98. When I came out with my first album in 98. Because of the content, because of the, as you heard there, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer? Now that's not the best translation, but it's a very famous verse. It's a verse from which we derive our conceptualization of Satan as Lucifer, at least that name. What it means, and we'll be talking about that. So, verse 3, wrong window. And that's streaming properly. That's good. I should check that now and again. Okay. Here we are. And it shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow, and from thy fear, and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon, and say, How hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers. Now, hold on. Let's go with the intro. Let's just look at verse 3 really quick. Or for however long necessary. Alright. So, when God will give you rest from your sorrow, fear, bondage, Israel suffered many captivities and bondage because of their sins. And, one of the most, of course, egregious is the Babylonian captivity. And I think specifically is referring to that captivity. Because, as far as, it's probably referring to all captivity in the ultimate sense, of course. The idea of captivity, the sorrow and the fear and the hard bondage are all related, obviously, because the sorrow is because of the hard bondage. The fear is because of the hard bondage of first the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and they were made to serve. All will serve the king of Babylon. That's in Jeremiah, it reiterates that over and over again. You shall serve the king of Babylon. They didn't want to serve, but they would be made to serve him. And when God delivers them from the king of Babylon, it says that they would take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. In the end times, there's also a bondage. It says, He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword shall be killed with the sword. That verse in and of itself points you back to the Old Testament. Because the book of Revelation doesn't specifically talk about people being led into captivity, unless you talk about the mention of enslavement and stuff like that, or until you go abstract, and then all of a sudden, abstractly there's a certain sense of captivity, because all the world's going to wander after the beast. They're going to worship the beast. They're going to take his mark. And the mark is a representation of one's allegiance to the beast system, or however you want to characterize that. But the mark identifies you with that system. Just like wearing a mask identifies you with cooperating with the CDC guidelines. Of course, until all of a sudden the CDC changes its mind and you still want to wear a mask. But anyways, that's the point. It's like the mark designates you as belonging to him. One of the things we learn in the New Testament from Jesus, he talks about the situation with sin as a form of bondage. as a form of captivity. That sin is also a kind of slavery. That mankind has always been enslaved to sin. And we obey it like a master. And he came to set us free by the power of his blood. So that, in the book of Revelation, the captivity is different. It is spiritual captivity. They are enslaved mentally, enslaved spiritually, because they worship the beast. Just as when they worshipped idols, God sold them into captivity to the Babylonians. When they worship the beast, they're going to sell them into captivity to Satan. And when Jesus said, you cannot serve two masters, there's an implication there of service, of bondage. Because, the price in exchange for being set free is bondage. It's, because it's like I am bought with a price. I don't belong to myself. I was sold under sin, as it's written. Well, the chapter jumped. I don't remember how we got down to chapter 1 suddenly. I think occasionally if I leave my cursor in the wrong spot, it'll somehow jump down there. Okay, well, when this deliverance, when God gives you rest from all this sorrow, and, because obviously through fear of bondage, or through just being in sin, there is fear, there is sorrow. There is bondage. All those things in our lives when we serve sin. We live in fear of being caught, perhaps, or in fear of doing without. When you have, doing without is like, because when you're in bondage to some things like drugs, doing without them is like this fear. What am I going to do if I run out of drugs? What am I going to do? And then when you look at your situation and what kind of bondage you're in, it can be depressing. I'm just a loser. I'm just trapped. And that's how you feel. I know. Well, when you are delivered from that, this is sort of when the Lord returns, obviously, that's what we're looking to. That you will take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. That also context because of we're talking about it after God relieves the bondage, after he delivers from the fear, after that. So this passage is going to look back from the future. It's looking to the future and then in the future looking back. So it's kind of an interesting thing because it's talking about in the future you're going to look back and say this. Sorry. How had the oppressor ceased, the golden city ceased? What it means is, when we say how, it's like it's a word of marvel. Like, how is this done? Like meaning, or like as I say, and how? It's like because the way in which things happen is significant, right? The city can cease a lot of ways, but how has these cities ceased? Like it's one thing if you walk up to a city and say, like, oh, the city's gone. Or it's, I don't know. When cities disappear, it is pretty, But still, they can have greater or lesser falls. The city can just die and dry up and be abandoned. Usually happens to smaller places. But of course, old cities were smaller places. They can dry up and become abandoned. But they can also be burned to the ground. And depending on what you see, it's like it's a great fall. And Satan, we know he will have a great fall. In fact, this is the passage where they say, when he's fallen, they say, is this the man that made the earth to tremble? How has he fallen? So how has the oppressor ceased? Wow. The ceasing the oppressor is very remarkable. That's what you're going to say. The oppressor has ceased. And how? Look at the golden city. The golden city is Babylon. In the book of Revelation, we have Babylon. And it's a city That great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Some people say it's Jerusalem. I think it's supposed to mean Babylon in that context, in Revelation, Or people say it's Rome. Well, if Rome is secretly Babylon, sure. But the thing is, why is Babylon there in the first place? Well, because it's an example of Rome. Yeah. No. Babylon and Assyria and Rome are all examples of each other, true enough, but they're also examples of something greater. And that's the essence of how prophecy works. There's something, as far as the Old Testament prophecies, they had near-term applications, and then they have long-term applications. This proverb against the king of Babylon, his fall is what they're marveling at. And it's going to go into detail. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. The symbols of rule, the symbols of authority are the staff and the scepter. When you hold them, that's like saying, I have the power. I mean, obviously they're symbols. Just putting them in the hand of anybody doesn't, I have the power. That doesn't just do that for you. But when you walk into a judge's chamber and you see the one who has the gavel and the robes, you know who the judge is. Just the same thing in the ancient times. You walk in the room, you see the one with the staff and the scepter, and you know who the king is. Well, the king is wicked. And also there's also just the kingdom and the administrative state. Because the wicked is not just the king himself, but the whole system that supports the king, the whole kingdom that brings it about, that brings the power to do the wickedness. Because the king of Babylon was quite cruel. And though Nebuchadnezzar eventually pens a chapter of the Bible in Daniel, he also is he was certainly a cruel king. In his wars he made and in the captivities he brought upon people. But the story of Nebuchadnezzar is really for another place. But he is one of the kings of Babylon, but he only symbolizes the ultimate king of Babylon. Because the ultimate king of Babylon is what we see in Revelation. See, because the things like Rome and Babylon and all that stuff symbolizes something greater. They are images of things in the heavenlies. They're images of evil powers in dark places, in high places. He has broken their ruler. The symbols of their power are broken. When the symbols are broken, it represents the fact that their power that the symbols represent being broken. The symbol represents the power, and so when they break the symbol, it represents the breaking of the power. Because obviously you could just break the staff and it doesn't do anything. It's just a staff. He'll just go get a new one and throw you in the dungeon anyways. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted and none hindereth. That's a bad translation. And I wonder, now I think it's a bad translation based on my studies from years ago. But I've been writing on the back of that for a long time. Like when I did that song, I could have pulled it up, but I'm not going to. I translate that line, unsparing persecution, relentless, he that smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke. And as it says, now the reason this is I'm sorry, I didn't bring it up yet. Hold on here. All right, browse internet, here we go. And I know you're not all watching, but that's okay. You can listen. But here we have actually Babylon, Israel. Okay, fine. And you notice even notice here with the chapter, the King James, they put verses 1 through 3 up here, and then 1 and 2 up there, because they're like, okay, that's a totally separate thought. Oh, I don't want to do that. All right. Isaiah 14. Why does it say Isaiah 1? Okay, wait. All right, Isaiah 14. Now I want which version? Let's go right to the Devil's translation, since we're going to talk about that at some point here. We're going to go to the NIV. I'm just curious if they did a better job here, if they agree with me. Oh, we're on wrong chapter. 14. Come on. Just going to give it a second. Have some coffee. Mm-hmm. Oh, what's up? This taunt. This taunt. Let's see. Oh yeah. Let's see. Look at it. But you can see the way they translate. Here's an example of the King James translation being wrong. Just wrong. And you can tell they're wrong. Because you know why? We've been doing prophecy for a while here, for a few weeks, right? And I've pointed out to you many times the way the prophet Isaiah loves to double things. He doubles them all the time. He's always doubling them. He's saying, the Lord has broken the rod of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers. How has the oppressor come to the end? How has his fury ended? You know what I mean? The oppressor has ended. The oppressor has ended. His fury has ended. The rod is broken. The scepter is broken. The anger is struck down with unceasing blows. The which in anger struck down people with unceasing blows, which in fury subdued nations with relentless aggression. And even the next thing, there's a doubling of a lot. I mean, not necessarily every single clause, but it's so common. It would be jarringly, and it is jarringly incorrect to change the form like this and say, is persecuted and none hinders, because it just doesn't make sense. And though it may be true, and it's like I said, you can make mistakes that are correct. Yeah, like that when Satan is overthrown at the end, people look and say, look at he that was the big honcho of evil is now, being punished, essentially. And no one's going to stop it, right? That sounds good. It sounds like, okay, that fits. It's not like the idea is not so alien to the scripture that I'm like, that just must be rejected out of hand because it doesn't belong. It's like saying thou shalt kill. And it's not that bad. It'll work. But because of the way prophecy works, you can tell that this has been mistranslated. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke. A continual stroke is going to be doubled. Is persecution and none hinders. That's wrong. It should say with an unsparing persecution. He who ruled the nations in anger with an unsparing persecution, or with a continual stroke. It's just doubled. That's it. And that shows you one example right there. King James translation, not good. That's not right. It's not a terrible mistake, but it does totally change the meaning of the passage. Of that line. It totally changes its meaning, but not in a way that's doctrinally significant, you notice. It's not, like I said, because the reason it works is because it's probably true. It fits into the story. You know what I mean? It's like throwing in after, and they lived happily ever after, and they made cupcakes. It works. It's fine. It doesn't change the story. It's not like I said, and they lived happily ever after, and then they didn't live happily ever after. Oops. Where it doesn't make any sense. It's not that screwy. Okay, I don't need to go on about that. But so, he smote the people in wrath. He ruled the nations in anger. In a relentless way. That's what it's saying. The whole earth is at rest and is quiet. They break forth into singing. Because of this relentless persecution. It's kind of like the morning when the night goes. Like you think of like this dark night. And then you ever been up really early when the birds really start going? Because in the morning, like now, they're not talking at all. This is not the real morning, right? Up with the birds. Though, honestly, in the wintertime, it is quite dark at this time. But, now it's getting to that point where it's light at 7:30 or 8. It's almost 8. It's light at 7, too, when I come down. And so, what was the point? I don't know what I was saying. Singing. Oh, the birds singing. Birds singing. That the whole, the world being kind of, there's a terror of the night. Creatures die. There's hunting. There's all kinds of fear in the night. And the night represents a lot of things. It's always like the night represents the time of darkness, the time of the enemy, the time of Satan. And it doesn't say dawn, but this reminds me of dawn. I mean, the breaking forth of singing, the earth being at rest and quiet, and suddenly, it's being totally silent. You've ever been in the silence of nature? I've seen nature go silent. I've never seen it break forth, except in the morning. If you actually watch the sunrise, you can hear it. I've never actually watched the sunrise, but I've done things that were at the same time as the sun rising, and I was outside and the sun was rising, and I noted the things going on as the earth came to life. But I've never actually specifically gotten up just to watch the sunrise, which to me seems to be... I was going to say something ungracious about people who do such things. As far as I would never just get up first thing in the morning to watch the sun come up. I'm sorry, it happens every day. As beautiful as it is, but being up, you hear that those birds bring. It's a beautiful thing. It's wonderful when you hear nature sort of come into its full bloom. That's what I was imagining here, just like the earth quiet. Like it was being persecuted, and they're all like, is it over? Is he gone? Is that it? Is it done? You ever been in a bad situation and you feel like you're just poking your head out and you're like, is it safe to come out? I feel like that every day, I remember the other day I went out with my mask, and for some reason, I went out and needed a mask. And, but I felt like surely it's over, because I don't go out often enough. I go out, I haven't been out a lot anyways, is what I would say. Not that I need to get out more, but I don't go often enough to establish this, I stay home for long enough, and I listen to enough things, and I get lost a little, stay home a few days. I go back to town, and I sort of expect it to be over. I'm always disappointed. And I just feel like that's what, some days, everyone just take off your things and be free. You already are free. You can just do it. Make us put the masks on. Make us do it. If we all take them off, do you think the stores are going to send all the customers home? No, they just send me home because nobody wants to help. Nobody wants to resist. It should have been fought. I tell you, if I didn't trust that God was in control, I'd be depressed about the state of my fellow countrymen and the cowardice that we all just showed over the past year. I mean, I knew I wasn't that brave. But I'm shocked at how much my little tiny bit of bravery, what that represents in the midst of a lot of, we're all in short supply apparently. It's not good. So now the whole earth is at rest, quiet. They break forth into singing. Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since thou art laid down, no feller has come up against us. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet the other coming. Well, hold on there. Hold on for that. The whole earth is at rest, and it's quiet. They break forth and sing. Okay. The fir trees rejoice. This is part of it. The fir trees rejoice at thee. The trees, all nature. But it's important. It's an important thing. I've mentioned this before. Prophecy is connected because we believe the Bible is inspired by one God. That's what makes it a one book. It was not written by one person. God didn't sit down and just pen a unitary book. He inspired it through dozens of people over hundreds of years, really thousands of years. Well, Moses. If you consider it certainly covers a time frame of thousands of years, but definitely written over centuries, and over 1,000 years. I mean, certainly it took several. Maybe. What I'm saying is, I don't know if I would say the Bible took thousands of years to write, but it doesn't span many thousands of years of history. But it does span over 1,000 years in its time. I mean, the writings from David date back 1,000 years BC, and the writings in the New Testament are actually written after 0 BC, obviously. And so that spans over 1,000 years. I mean, just from David to, and that's a definitely, I don't think there's any dispute that the Psalms of David are from David. Like, I've never even heard anyone dispute that. Because David is one of those characters, just like Jesus. It's like, only fools want to make them not real. Because they don't like legendary figures, I guess. That's probably figures that seem legendary and larger than life. All right, let's see here. Here we go. The fir trees, the cedars. Oh, the prophecy is interconnected. Okay. This reference to cedars of Lebanon, fir tree, it's important. The cedars of Lebanon were where they got the best wood, like the wood for the temple, the king's house. They would go to Lebanon to harvest trees for building the houses of the house of the Lord, the temple, anything they needed, the finest wood. And it represents also, like when Solomon had big projects, he would go to Lebanon for wood. All the kings of Israel, they sent to Lebanon for cedars of Lebanon. He went to Lebanon for cedars and brought them to Jerusalem. And the cedars were the kings would go get them. Because it was a big project to bring them down because it's quite far. Usually you build with local lumber. I would assume in the ancient world you built with local lumber. However much you can travel in an ox cart in a day. At the best. How much can you move around and obviously. Okay, but the cedars of Lebanon also had a representative symbolic thing. They kind of represent, because they were tall. And mountains and hills often symbolically represent, they represent large things like nations. And the trees on these mountains can represent, like, the kings and the leaders. If you think about a mountain covered with these trees, these tall trees, it's like an army. And the tallest trees are like the generals. As far as that symbolically, it's like that's how it's represented. I even have a whole passage you want to study, Ezekiel 31. There. Where is it? Here we go. Let's take a look at Ezekiel 31. Because I wanted to draw that in real quick. Because this is one of those passages that, people say, people may say, hey, people say this is about Satan, but no way, this is about Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Right. Now, it says, Son of man, speaking to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitude, whom art thou like in thy greatness? And it says, behold, the Assyrian. Now, there's some dispute about the word Assyrian there, whether that was right, but whatever. Because the Assyrian also is a lot like the word for a box cedar tree. All right, so I don't know. I don't know what that means, but I do think it's fine to say Assyrian. It's not critical for our interpretation, so we're just going to leave that for now, okay? He was a cedar in Lebanon, with fair branches, and with shadowing shroud, and of a high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great, the deep set him up on high, with her rivers running round about his plants, and sent out her little rivers to all the trees of the field. Therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long, because of the multitude of the waters when he shot forth. All the fowls of heaven made their nests in his boughs, and under his branches did all the beasts of the field bring forth their young, and under his shadow dwelt all great nations. Big tree. Thus was he fair in his greatness by the length of his branches, for his root was by great waters. There's a reason he was blessed. He was in a good location, The cedar, like the Syrian had the Tigris River. The city was built on the river, literally. And it fed him. But I think it's also saying there are other things that fed the king. Like the waters that feed a powerful monarch are not the same as the waters that feed a tree. It's not just having access to water. My city's on the water, so I'm like an awesome king. It doesn't make that automatically. But there are other things, blessings from God, that make kings great. They don't realize they're as much a victim of circumstance as the hobo that lives at the base of their palace. I mean, you can't be a great king. It's hard to be a great king when you're not living in a great location or the great time to be that great king. You know, there's a lot that has to come together for a king to rise. You know, it's like, so the great water represents God's blessing and all that. Meaning he set up circumstances that he could be a great king. And the kings ought to remember where their power and where how they get to where they are has a lot more to do with God's will than it has to do with their abilities. Because why does it have more to do with their ability? People's abilities are important. You can't be a great king without having skill. You can't be a great leader without having skill. But you can't even get there if you don't get a chance. You know what I mean? The world's greatest violinists may never have touched a violin. I mean, they have the natural ability to be the greatest violinist, but they never practiced or even touched a violin, so they died never realizing their potential. Maybe I could be a great king or a great president or whatever. I don't think so. By the way, that's definitely not. I don't think so. I think I would make a great advisor to a president, but not a president, because of my lack of decisiveness. I have decisiveness, but I have a lack, and I don't trust it. Could be wrong about that. I don't know. I would rather be. I was always more of a fan of the whatever. I would rather advise than be the one having to make the. You know why? Because I see so many. You know why I don't. It's not that I don't think I could be a leader. It's just I don't want to be a leader because the way my mind works and my ability to see things, or my inability not to see things, would be a better way to say it. And generally, it's not that I see everything, but I see a lot of things. I see a lot of things mentally. Because of that, a lot of times I'm tormented in decision making because I see too many options, I see too many variables, I see too many pitfalls, I see too many troubles, I see too many things. I see everything, and sometimes I miss the path through the forest because of the trees. I don't say I miss the forest for the trees, but I miss the path because I'm too focused on all the trees in the way. That can be the case, and maybe that's a bit. I don't, this is stupid. This is not about me, but it can be like that. Anyways, I made him fair by the multitude of his branches. Well, anyways, the cedars in the garden of God could not hide him. The fir trees were not like his boughs. The chestnut trees were not like his branches. Nor any tree in the garden of God was like him in his beauty. I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all the trees of Eden that were in the garden of God envied him. We're in the garden of God suddenly. Obviously, in symbolic language, we're there. We're not literally in the garden of God. But he's talking about Eden, the garden of God. And it talks about all this stuff. Now it talks about his fall. Right? And you see that one reference to Eden, and people say, well, that reference to Eden, Paul, how can you then say this is the serpent or this is Satan? Well, because there's connections. And because Satan was in the Garden of Eden. He was, and he did stand out. You know what I mean? The serpent and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, both. There were trees and there was other things in the garden. But like I was showing you in Isaiah there, if there's no connection to any of this, then what's this all about? What's this about here? The Cedars of Lebanon. What are they all happy about? Nobody's cutting us down. My point is, if the Cedars of Lebanon are representative of great kings and rulers, that can be cut down by an even greater king, so to speak. That is something you see in what's I say? Well, Satan, he will rule over the nations. He will establish his kingdom over the other kingdoms. and rule them with an unsparing persecution, as it says. And so they rejoice in that now they're not being cut down. Because in a sense, by establishing his own rule, he takes away others. So what is this? Let's start practical. What does this mean in Isaiah's time for the king of Babylon? The king of Babylon is no longer going to come around and cut down all the local rulers, is what he's saying. The local rulers are the Cedars of Lebanon, the king of Moab, the king of Ammon, the king of Judah, the king of Syria, the king of Israel. I mean, they're all the sort of the trees of that zone, the big tall trees, the big players in the zone. And who comes to destroy them all? The king of Babylon. He comes in and takes all these kingdoms. And so they rejoice because no one is coming any longer to cut down their kingdoms. That's what it literally meant to Isaiah. And the meaning carries over to the end times, that the rulers that Satan displaces in the end times, because he will displace rulers. Well, of course, people who were once in charge are going to be not in charge when the Antichrist appears. He's going to take over. And his enemies will rejoice at his fall, because he was the one who took them out of their power. Because he will take people out of power to establish his own power, to put his own people in place. Because there is a world government that's coming at that time. There may be one that's coming now that, the world government they're trying to establish now could just be maybe something to do with that deadly wound they always talk about, Because I think about they're really trying to set up like a vaccine passport, or they did at some point. I don't think it's going to happen. But who knows? Things can happen. But the point is, they want to do these things. They want to do something that's a lot like the mark of the beast. They want something like masks, except they want it permanent. They want something like masks, except it identifies you. They want the opposite of a mask. A mask, one of the things about masks, and why I don't think it's going to be long-lived, is because no one can countenance this anonymity of people running around with masks on. I mean, I'm shocked. I mean, where are the people reporting on the crime statistics of how many times masked people have robbed stuff? I mean, you get to walk in with a mask and you have the element of surprise. As it used to be, if you were working at a gas station and if a guy comes in with a ski mask or any kind of mask, you're immediately alert. Like, what's going on? Maybe you press the button. Maybe you call in the police or something. Maybe there's an alarm you trip right away. But nowadays, people come in with a mask and everybody's just like, "Hi, sir." It's like you notice, you're being robbed until all of a sudden he's pointing a gun at you. Keep your hands where I can see them. They would like to get a mark of the beast started somewhere. Or something like a mark of the beast, I'm saying. Something that controls you. Something that controls your commercial, you can't buy or sell, you can't go to this, you can't go. They want you in a system. It's obvious. It's something the world is pushing towards. We're not there, but you can see the shadows of it forming, right? I mean, we can see those shadows forming. So that's interesting. Because I've never really seen it. I've saw people talk about chips and RFID, and I think the idea of some of these chips is wonderful. It's like, I want to get my dog chipped. I'd like to have my children all have chips in them, so if anything happened, I could track them down, I mean, I get it. I get it why people, it's that, I even get the seductiveness of masks, this feeling of safety and security. Like, I put this on and I'm safe, I won't die. You won't make love either, with a mask on. No one's going to kiss you. You want to forswear kissing for the rest of your life? I think that's kind of sad. It's like, because you got to take risks to get, you got to take a risk to be happy in life. Life is not hiding in a hole somewhere. That's not happiness. Hunkered down in a hole hiding behind a mask and all that. What I was going to say, though, is that, if they try hard enough and it fails, like, in my mind, I'm tossing around, is that this concept of the deadly wound? You know what I mean? Like, the beast starts trying to come to be, like the world system really tries to come to be and somehow fails. Because, like, I think they just failed. But I don't think it was what I'd call a deadly wound. Because failing to bring about a system is not a deadly wound. Like, if they're trying to bring about the beast system, it'd be something that almost destroys the very concept of it. I mean, like a massive backlash against it. You know what I mean? Like a deadly wound of the system would be everyone throwing. Like, for example, if the masks were the mark of the beast, and they represented the beast system, and they also were the mechanism by which the beast gets wounded. This is all a lot of assumptions that don't, we're just speculating here, but it's fun. Then, if all that was so, then the mark, then if the mask, let's say the mask was a mark of the beast, that was genuinely the mark of the beast, then the deadly wound would be us all tearing it off and throwing them away, because we're not cooperating. If nobody cooperates, the beast fails. It's like he's dead. That's what I said about the vaccine passports. I heard someone say they're dead, and I was like, that, that makes you think. I'm not saying it is. I'm not at all. But I'm saying when I see stuff like that in prophecy, and I see people behaving the way you can use it like a template and say, they're behaving kind of like people, because people are people. You can watch their behavior and try to line it up and figure out, okay, so prophetically it would look kind of like that, or that's what it might look like. What are people's behaviors going to be? How are they going to act? Well, now you see how they act in these kind of crises, and so expect the worst. With the mark of the beast, man. Because I think they're going to be a lot more motivated. It's one thing with this pandemic. I think a lot of people deep down know it's not that serious, and a lot of people agree with you. So there's way too much pressure out there against it for it to have the strength to really, to be that oppressive system, because it's just not strong enough. Because people don't, because it's all about a disease, and it's not that scary for most people. It's not that scary. 99% of people are not going to be harmed by it. Not seriously. But you talk about, what's something that is scary? I was going to get something wait, that's not scary. Honestly, I'm sorry. Because, like, when it's a God, like, God commanded us to put these masks on. Anyone who doesn't put this mask on is showing themselves as against God. Just like I'm showing myself as against the CDC and all this nonsense and all their lies. They're a bunch of liars. I was thinking about, like, I want, if there weren't enough people already, I talked about doing videos about this, but, like, there's plenty of people doing videos about coronavirus. And I didn't end up doing really anything about it because, you know what? Other than in the Bible study, there's plenty of stuff out there. I always feel like I could say certain things better, or I want to say them, or I have this urge to say them, but, it's most important that I keep on the Bible studies, because there aren't a lot of people doing that. Are there? I don't know. Maybe there are. Maybe I'm just out of my mind. Is YouTube filled with people doing line by line Bible studies every day? Is that a thing? Is there patience for that? I don't know. There has to be patience for me, because my line by line is a little, like, the lines, there's a lot in between them. Okay. So, they will rejoice that no longer they're, these are his enemies rejoicing in him. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. All they shall speak and say to thee, art thou become as weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy viols. The worm is spread under thee, and the worms cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? Hold on about what he said. So, the fir trees, the kings. You notice the next verse is about kings. not surprisingly, because it's almost like a double, and then there's a doubling there of a symbolic. And now we talk about kings. We go literal with the kings, but we're talking about hell. Hell, there's not a lot of talk about hell in the Old Testament, but hell here is the word Sheol. In fact, when I do my song, I say, I say hell from beneath. Actually, I don't know. Wait, the pomp is brought. Oh, the grave. The grave is Sheol. Thy pomp is brought down to Sheol, and the noise of thy viols. That's one of my favorite rhymes. Sorry. Sheol and viol. Hell from beneath is moved for thee, to meet thee at thy coming. I mean, hell from beneath hell. What is hell here? And you'll see here. Well, we'll get to the Devil's Translation in a minute. Okay, I got transition. Wrong one, Paul. Wrong one. That one. Oh, come on. Oh, I did it. There we go. Oh, I want study mode. There we go. That one. Not study mode. I want browse internet. Sorry. It's the name of my different little windows. Okay, there we are. Browse internet. Excellent. There we go. So, hell from beneath. What is the word for hell? Oh, I'm not in this. King James plus Strong's. Ugh. Where did I change my Bible version? KJV plus Strong's. There we go. Sorry. There we go. Hell from beneath is moved for the hell. Here is Sheol. And the word grave is also Sheol. So the word grave in verse 11 is the same as hell in verse 9. And you can tell by the imagery, it's referring very obviously to the ground, the worms and all that stuff. Though, people will remember that Jesus said, it's better to have, if your eye offend you, pluck it out, because it's better to have one eye and enter into life than to have two eyes and to be cast into hell. Now, he did not say Sheol in that case. He said Gehenna, which is a different concept. But they're related, obviously, because they have to do with death. But Gehenna, and he said, where their worms do not die, and the fire is not quenched. Now, some people have taken that as meaning, like, oh, it's saying they live forever. But that doesn't say that, actually. If I had just said where the fire isn't quenched, just right off the bat, if I say, send you to the fire where the fire isn't quenched, torturing someone requires you to quench the fire. If I put unquenchable fire on something, symbolically speaking, I'm supposed to understand that thing is going to be totally burned up. Unquenchable fire does not get quenched. Torment requires someone to be kept alive, and so you have to only injure them. You cannot just incinerate them. You know what I mean? The hell of torment people talk about cannot be an incinerator. It has to be more like an oven. You know what I mean? And it has to have some sort of, there has to be some sort of something else. It's a place where pain is supposedly caused. I don't believe in this, by the way. I do believe in that there is an element. I believe the scriptures. Okay, let me say, I believe there are all the scriptures you could possibly throw at me. I'm going to believe them, but I may have a slightly different interpretation for some of them. Because I think a lot of things people say about hell are not supportable scripturally. There's a lot of the things they say. Just the whole notion of like the way they talk about the torture and just like they make up so much of it. And so much of it is just mythological that it blinds people to what's actually written. So here we're talking about hell is moved, but I want to stay in the symbology of what Isaiah's talking about instead of getting sidetracked into a whole doctrinal dissertation on the subject of hell. Now, for those of you interested, and I do owe my students a big study. I want to do a study that is a comprehensive survey of the scripture, what the scriptures say on this subject, which I have a proto-organized, sort of semi-organized collection of notes and stuff that will someday come together, and we will do that. In the meantime, several years ago, over a decade ago, to tell you the truth. If you go to my website, oraclesofgod.org, and I always advertise it, it's a free website. It'll say that it's not secure, by the way. And if it gives you, just ignore that. I don't ask you for information. My website doesn't ask you to enter your credit card information or your email address, or if there's no boxes to enter information on my website. And they want to charge me for security. You don't need security. It's a read-only website. You're just downloading my music. You're not sending information you need to keep secure. So I don't know if anyone's ever been turned off by that not secure garbage on my website. It annoys me, I'll tell you that. Because you see it says not secure up at the corner. Whatever. It's plenty fine. My website's been on the internet for almost 15 years. So actually, well, for almost 14, actually. All right. So if you look on this here, I have single subject studies. One of the oldest subjects I did was this way down on the bottom, because it's not even really a single subject study. It's just it's a written thing, I believe. Did I ever do an audio for it? Oh, you can listen to it. I wrote it and recorded it so you can listen. It's a lengthy... Well, this is about death. I'm sorry. This is not about hell. But it's similar. This is like a starter. This is about death. What do I think? I have something about hell too, though, right? Don't I? I do. Oh, of course, right above that. A discussion on the subject of hell. A 6-hour discussion. I got in a debate with a pastor. So, but there's a lot of important information in that discussion. So there you go. If you really want to take up that subject, or even if you want to argue with me about it, well, there you go. May 11th, 2015. That was my anniversary. So that's there. That's available. Okay, I don't want to. I'm just hanging out here now. Okay. So Sheol is the Old Testament word used for hell. It corresponds to the Greek word Hades when they use it for hell. And at least some meaning in the New Testament, words that were translated Sheol in the Old Testament were translated into Hades in the Greek New Testament. I mean, when you wrote hell in Greek, if you were looking at an Old Testament passage and it said Sheol, and you were going to write it in Greek, people wrote Hades. It doesn't mean the Greek concept of Hades was the same as the Hebrew concept of Sheol. It just means they use the same word. They use those words as interchangeable. Now, the idea of Sheol in the Old Testament, as you look at it, there's not a lot said, but it's obvious it refers to the grave itself. It does not refer to heaven or an afterlife-like state, though it does represent what happens after life. The afterlife is death. You know what I mean? Afterlife was what? What comes out? What's the after? You know, like, it's funny that they call it the afterlife. What they mean is death. There's no afterlife. There is life and death. You will live in resurrection, or you will be dead. It's not, the resurrection is an afterlife. The idea of an afterlife, but when you die, you have a second life, is not a Christian concept as far as I can tell. Even though there's books on it. And I even met the author of a famous book on it who was extremely rude. Maury, theologian. I think his name was Maury, whatever. It was funny because I mentioned him on Facebook, and God, he showed up in like 2 seconds. I mean, not really 2 seconds, but it was like within hours he was commenting. Because I didn't mention him, actually. Someone else mentioned his name to me, saying like, well, I don't... It was a cool thing, because I was a guy I had debated with who won a debate with me and convinced me to be just openly Trinitarian. We were talking about hell, and he's like, I don't really know much about the subject, but this is a great book. And he recommended this book, which whatever. I would just spend all my time... I would read it and just be angry thinking about how I would refute each passage, and I feel like this. I would just take on this burden of feeling I needed to do that. I already have enough things that I feel like I need to do that are important. So that's one less. The grave, but the Hebrews concept of Sheol, as we said, the New Testament, okay, but it was the grave. When Jesus talked about Hades, he was talking about Jesus talked about Gehenna, the other hell. And it's hard to tell in English because in English they translated both words. Here's the problem: whatever word you were looking at, and if you were looking at Hebrew Sheol, New Testament Hades, or Gehenna, whatever you were looking at as a translator, you translated it hell. So they're three different words, and they represent three different words representing two very different places. Sheol represents the state of the dead and the grave itself. It's often translated the grave because it is definitely a place you go down to. It is in the earth. The worms are there. Now, but there is a relationship to it because Gehenna answers to the lake of fire in the book of Revelation. And the lake of fire is the second death. So it is not surprising that in Isaiah 66, a passage that is in the Old Testament that is also very closely related to the concept of Gehenna, because it has things in it that Jesus cited. Specifically, Isaiah 66, Jesus cited when he said, their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. Because the idea of, honestly, again, if worms don't die, if I put a worm on you and it eats through your flesh a little bit, whatever, if I get some flesh-eating worm and then dies, I may recover. And I'll certainly suffer, though. But I'll be kept alive. But if I have a worm that just won't die, there's not enough of me to go around. It can't stop, like, just like an unquenchable fire. What happens when an unquenchable fire meets a soul? I think some people think of it as the immovable object versus the irresistible force. But like my dad said, something's got to give. I remember he used to say, what happens when the immovable object meets the irresistible force? I always wondered what he was talking about. But obviously those are only reputations. There's no such thing in the human world as an immovable object or an irresistible force. But honestly, when the immovable object meets the irresistible force, I get my money on the irresistible force. Why? Because the thing that is static is always at the disadvantage. The thing that's trying to hold, the thing that's in action, the active force is always the more powerful, in my opinion. Just on a symbolic level, it's just much more powerful. Anyways, off the topic. So there's this picture of the pomp. How has he fallen, right? We said, how has he fallen? Oh my gosh. Look at him. He was once this beautiful king. Now look at him. The worms are spread under him. The worms are over him. We got like a blanket full of worms. You ever see like those movies where they have the corpses eaten by worms, like Indiana Jones or something like that? The skull opens his mouth and a snake is coming out and like this grotesque, we've always see those images, and they always have a certain effect on humanity, and just like zombies and corpses, because there's the height of human beauty and orderliness and attainment and power, but there's also the depth of depravity and the actual nature of human life, which is it dies, it corrupts, it turns to dust and ashes and filth. And a body covered with worms represents really what humanity has to look forward to. And also now, the great enemy is brought low. The great enemy is brought to the grave. The great enemy is brought down and will be made to be shown to be just a man. Just another mortal being. Just another one. Just another cedar in Lebanon. Nothing special. And so the next verse 12, how art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down the ground, which shall weaken the nations? And though we've gone over quite a bit in the past few days, we've only got 2 minutes here. I'm not going to start on it because we will go 15 minutes over. Easily. Oh, I skipped verse 10. So we will pick it up in verse... Oh, I missed verse 9. I didn't even comment on it. Ugh. We're going to have to take a little time here before we leave. Okay? Because I don't want We cover verse 8 thoroughly. 9. Hell is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. That is the image of like the grave. There is another image earlier, right? We read it in what chapter? It was earlier in Isaiah, right? Hell hath enlarged herself and opened her mouth without measure, and their glory and their multitude and their pomp, and he that rejoiceth shall descend into this open mouth of hell. Yeah, the grave is opening her mouth, ready to receive the corpses of the dead. Think about the mass graves in World War II and stuff like that you've seen. You know what I mean? Like the idea of hell opening her mouth and like to receive all these dead men. Because that's what it threatens. And we certainly know in the book of Revelation, there's going to be a ton of death. Man, there is a human catastrophe coming where we have a third of the world dead. Can you imagine just the third of the people die? How much the massive amount of bodies, they'll be everywhere. You'll see skulls everywhere. Everywhere. There's going to be dead bodies inside the street. I mean, there's dead bodies everywhere. For a third of the people die, are you kidding? Or it could be on one side of the globe, I guess. Like maybe just one country gets taken out. I just don't think it. That's not the way I imagine it. But my imagination is not the same as reality. So, got to remember that. Oh, okay. It hath raised up from the thrones all the king. Oh yeah. All right. Hell is moved. He is brought down. But between, as it's moved, it's opening, and all of a sudden, it stirs up the dead. The dead, And again, to me, this is all symbolic. Because he's not really saying this is literally happening. But in a spiritual sense, it is. Because you're going to die. The grave is opening up. And everyone already there is going to talk to you. And they're going to say, ah! They're going to say, are you become as weak as we? Are you become like us? A desiccated corpse? A dried out old skeleton. Because all the kings of the earth who ever been, all the great kings, like it says, all the kings of the nation, all of them lie in glory. Everyone in his own house and their tombs. They're all laid out with their jewels and bedecked with their gold and their ceremonial dresses and their servants slain with them and their boats and all this, like the Egyptians did. And many other places they buried their kings with all kinds of goodies, right? They all laid out good. But it says of him, not so. But what they're saying is also saying, like, ultimately speaking, Satan is just another ruler. He's just another king. He seems like the most powerful. And in the book of Revelation, the Antichrist is going to be the biggest thing that ever hit the earth, man. They're going to think he's God. Not ancient people. Modern people are going to worship Satan as God. Even though, maybe not, they're not going to think it's Satan, of course, and maybe they'll think it's an alien. Maybe they'll think it's Jesus. Maybe they'll think it's I don't know. Maybe they'll think it's, I was going to throw out a politician's name. So famous politician, famous movie star, whoever. They're going to think it's something. But we have this vision of all the dead kings coming forth and seeing the fall of Satan. I'm going to throw it to Satan or the king of Babylon. King of Babylon, 2, are you become like us? All the kings have fallen. Name a king that hasn't. A kingdom that hasn't fallen. Well, the ones that are still existent. Yeah, but all the other ones are gone. And those are even, how long have they been around? A few centuries, a few millennia? The pharaohs were around for millennia. Where are the pharaohs now? They all become dust. They all become museum pieces. You ever seen a pharaoh? I've seen a pharaoh. It doesn't look too glorious to me. It looks pathetic. His little teeth sticking out. Ooh. His dried out skin. Ooh. I'm a big old pharaoh. I'm a big tough pharaoh. And my word, people die. Just to bury me, they killed 100 servants to bury with me just so I'd have them in the afterlife. But now my skin is black from, from drying out or whatever. Maybe he was black to begin with. Sorry, I didn't want to offend anybody. I just meant like the black of decay, not the black of melanin. Because let's face it, black folks are brown, not black. Let's face it. All right. Well, some are very deep, but they're still brown. Just like I'm not white. I'm brown. Just very light brown. So, okay, they're going to say, are you become as weak as they're going to marvel at this. Are you become like us? You come down like us. You know, and then my song in Ezekiel 31, if you look at my my YouTube channel, my other one, the Paul Strangini one, I think that, well, it's linked anyways, right? I have this video called Ezekiel 31, and it contains this song. I also have a video for Ezekiel 28. I never did a video for this. It would be good. I just don't want to do all. It's just making videos is a lot of work for whatever, for not much reward. I love it. I wish I had the time. But the videos, I recommend it because, you know, I visualize this. I took all this into account when I made the video. So I show all the kings of the nations kind of going into hell with Satan. Including characters like Lincoln and all. My sister was like, why'd you put Lincoln in there? I'm like, well, because. Why not? All the kings of the nation. In some ways, he was a despotic ruler. That's why. He didn't just free slaves. You know, I mean, I'm not saying anything against that part. I'm not. It's just, there's a lot of other things that was not so, you know, I mean, he suspended civil rights, you know, all those kind of things. You know, it's like, he preserved the Union. It's like, maybe it shouldn't have been preserved. You know what I mean, the war was only worth fighting. Afterwards, they knew though it was only worth fighting to free slaves. That's why in the end they changed it. They started off fighting to preserve the Union because they thought they'd be fighting for 1 week. You know what I mean? So let's preserve the Union. We'll kick their butts. You know what I mean? But then after 6 years of and 500,000 bodies later, they were like, you know, we were trying to free slaves. Because we don't want to have to all die for something as stupid as preserving the Union. My God. You know, if you're going to die in your hundreds of thousands, die for a worthy cause. And that's why they changed it. I mean, that's what they changed midstream. You know, they changed the perspective. It's like, you know, we got to fight for something like human freedom instead of the Union. Is it because, you know, again, there represents a greater vision there of something. You know, I want to make a great nation, but it's not in the interest necessarily of the people. You know? But whatever, it is what it is. History happened. History happened. There's not, you know, you can say good and bad things about everybody, but the kings of the nation, I judge the man separate from his. I mean, obviously, how a man is as a king affects his personal judgment, right? But there are certain aspects of it to which I do separate. Like, you get judged as a king. I would judge someone, personally, I would judge someone as a king on one side and as a man on another. And not that they don't both count. But it's a little different. You know what I mean? Like, the king has to make compromises that a person can afford to not make. Like, I can afford to be uncompromising about certain things. It's just like just like some people. You don't even have to be a king. Some people right now are forced to take vaccines to keep their job. I'm not going to tell people you shouldn't. You know what I mean? It's like, because I don't. Well, is there a moral imperative to not get the vaccine? You know, it's like, I don't like being forced to do anything. So I think that's annoying. I also don't like the fact that if you get it, they say, you know, whatever. Never mind. I don't want to talk about current events all the time. Thanks for joining me in this study. All right, I think we got this covered here. They marvel at his weakness. The themes are going to get over again. We'll pick it up at verse 12. It's a great place to start. I look forward to it, and we'll see that tomorrow. All right. Well, I'll do a different song.
The whole earth is at rest and it's quiet. They break forth into singing. Yeah, the fir trees rejoice at thee. The cedars of Lebanon sing. Since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. hell from beneath is moved for thee, to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the wrath by him for thee, all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up